So Zach received his BA from the University of Pennsylvania and his MFA from Boston University. He has exhibited in multiple museum exhibitions, such as the American Labor Museum, UMaine Museum of Art, and the Commonwealth Museum. He is a lecturer at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and Boston University, as well as a contributing critic to Collect Magazine, Big Red and Shiny, and Art Practical. So again, it's my pleasure to introduce to you artist Zach Horn.
Hi. First off, thank you all for coming. It's kind of funny to do this on Zoom. Normally, you would all have seen the exhibition and I would say, oh, look at that one over there. But I guess I'm really happy that people from all over the country are, nice to see you all, are here, and it's fun to be able to share virtually. I'm also going on my 6th hour of Zoom today, so if I'm looking kind of bleary-eyed, you'll forgive me. I taught all my classes today. But without further ado, let me share my screen. So what I want to talk about today is this project that I've been doing for about 4.5 years called United We Bargain, Divided We Beg. And it's a project that I've been working on in support of labor unions. And I thought I'd give you a little history about how I got started and show you a little bit what the work looks like. So this is Jimmy. This is my next door neighbor, Jimmy. He's like the world's best next door neighbor. Jimmy lives in the house he grew up in. He is a Verizon worker by day, and on the nights and weekends, he is renovating the house by himself. Jimmy is on the 10 to 15-year plan. He recently fixed a wall by taking it apart and then taking it down to the sill and then taking out the sill and then rebuilding the house entirely from scratch. It's kind of like if you wanted to change a tire, but you had to do it from inside the car. It's a little bit elaborate. Jimmy is the best. He would do anything for me as a neighbor. Jimmy helped me clean my gutters. That's a true story. Jimmy also once stood on the peaked roof of my garage with something like a 15-foot pole saw and helped me saw down by hand this enormous branch so that it wouldn't fall in my backyard. He's like the best. And so Jimmy is part of this union. He's in the IBEW local 2222. And in April of 2016, they went out on strike. They had been negotiating for 6 months with Verizon, and the negotiations were going nowhere. Verizon presented, in anticipation of the contract ending, presented a proposal, and 6 months later, they said the exact same proposal and said, take it or leave it. What they were arguing for is, the basics. Verizon asked for a clawback on like every single part of their contract. They asked for a cap on the pension. They wanted to outsource work. The most egregious one was they wanted to be able to move the Verizon workers to anywhere in the country for an extended period of time with no additional compensation and no choice. It was like, you move from Boston and you will go to anywhere else in the country at our decision, and you have no option and no way out. But Miles Calvi, who's the business manager of the IBEW local, said that the biggest issue was healthcare, and not even the healthcare for the workers, the current workers. It was actually healthcare for the retirees, that they were trying to just gut the whole thing so that all these retired linemen who had actually built the whole network that Verizon was relying on would be kind of left out in the cold. And so since Verizon, wouldn't budge on anything, that's when strike started. Officially, it was a strike in all of New England, except in Rhode Island, actually. In Rhode Island, there was a lockout. And the politics of that are whether or not the workers get unemployment insurance. So in Massachusetts, Charlie Baker said it's a strike, and so they didn't get any unemployment. And in Rhode Island, they said it was a lockout, so I believe they did. This is Verizon at the time. This is their 2016 annual report. And this is where I get hung up. 126.0 billion in consolidated revenue and 22.7 billion in cash flow. That's the number when they said that they couldn't pay for the healthcare about their retirees. So I just thought the whole thing was quite appalling. The guys were out for 7 weeks, and they actually had to go to court to be able to have picket lines. They were in a combined strike with the CWA, the Communication Workers of America, but the Verizon stores, like the Verizon wireless stores, were the CWA employees. And so the CWA and the IBEW had to go to court to say it was one big collective union and one big collective labor action to be able to have the picket lines outside the Verizon wireless stores. I mean, these guys are just like Jimmy, like salt of the earth, Boston guys, and 126 billion. So this was going on, and I decided to ask this museum, which is where the Commonwealth Museum is in Boston, if I could make a show in support of the Verizon workers and in support of the labor movement in general. And this was early in 2016, and at the same time, a couple other things were happening. My dad was the union president in Cheltenham. He's a teacher for a long time, and he was retiring, and so that was, I don't know, felt like a real moment, like something was changing. And the other thing was my grandmother, who was also a Philadelphia public school teacher and really involved with the formation of the union in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Federation of Teachers in the 1960s, was just diagnosed with gray area lymphoma, which is something in between Hodgkin's and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And so it was like all these things happening at the same time, that some were personal and some were, clearly political. And I just felt like I had to make the show. And fortunately, they said yes. So this is how you get a show. You get an email that looks something like this. Good news, we're looking forward to this project. It's kind of it. And this is the invitation. So you'll notice that it's like a full year, right? Between October 2016 and October 2017, I have like a full year to think things over, which, man, maybe is actually like a little bit too long. So this is the MFA in Boston, and I come here all the time because, well, maybe pre-COVID, but I used to go here all the time to take my students on tours and show them a bunch of artwork. This is the big gallery in the middle. It's Gallery 250. This big, beautiful painting is by Rubens. These ones are by the studio of Velázquez. So this is King Philip IV, and this is Infanta Maria Teresa. So actually, this is the King of Spain at the time, and this is his daughter. So this is the painting. This is Infanta Maria Teresa. And what's weird about this painting is that the girl was about 15 years old at the time. She was born in 1638. And this is what the MFA says. This painting is probably one of 3 portraits sent to potential suitors of Maria Teresa, the daughter of Spain's King Philip IV, and ultimately the wife of Louis XIV of France. So Velázquez in his studio, Velázquez was the court painter to King Philip IV, made 3 versions of this painting to take them to different courts in Europe to say, would you like to marry this girl? And she was 15 years old. So it's very, very creepy painting. And this painting is right around the corner. Right? This is in Gallery 251. This is by Millet. It's called The Sower. They're really opposite paintings, right? For being full-length portraits. This one's a light figure on a dark background. This one's a dark figure on a light background. She's inside, he's outside. But the thing that really bothered me about the comparison was that she got to see her face, right? It was all about identifying who she was as an individual, where this painting by Millet, his face was entirely hidden. Like, why is he turned into an archetype? Like, why isn't he a full-fledged individual? And so it started to bother me that paintings of workers were anonymous, and paintings of, well, royal family and aristocrats and fancy people were fully realized as individuals. Even this painting, right? This is Diego Rivera, who's a former communist, a real leftist. This is from the Detroit Institute of Art, the Detroit Industry Murals. And even here, right? All these guys are reduced to arms and legs. They're part of the machine rather than being real characters. And so part of my original idea was like, how could I correct the art historical record? How could I take some of the power and active glorification that came from painting somebody with this much attention to detail and use it to portray the labor union members? So I started with the king. This is the MFA version. And actually Boston has two versions. This is the one at the Isabel Stewart Gardner Museum. I really like this painting. His body is so big and his head is so little. And there's a really weird, like almost ballet, like 90-degree angle at his feet. It's a very awkward painting, but I really like it. And so this is the first painting I did in this series. This is Francisco. Francisco is in the facilities department at UMass Boston. He's a really good guy. He's bailed me and my students out a lot of times. And I painted him like King Philip IV, including the feet at the 90-degree angle. This is an earlier version of the painting, and I really messed this one up. It's the same canvas. Actually, it's Tyvek, which is a weird industrial material that they use for like a raincoat for a house, but it's a waterproofing material that you put on under the siding. And the things that I really hated were, one is it looked like the fluorescent tube on the ceiling was coming through his head like an arrow. And the other thing was this mop that I put in on the bottom. And I didn't realize until I saw this painting at the MFA, which is Julien Dupree haymaking. They hung this one at the bottom of the stairs by the rotunda, at least for a little while. And I just hated this painting. As soon as I saw it, I thought this is the cheesiest painting I've ever seen. And part of what bothered me is that it's like these happy worker paintings, like they should be happy in their place, like they're candy coated. So they're sort of it's demeaning to the workers, right? It doesn't show them having real feelings. I'm sure that woman does not love haymaking. She has real feelings and a real personality, and this felt really putting her in her place in our class. And so I immediately went back like that day and started reworking this painting of Francisco, who's in the SEIU 32BJ. For that matter. And you'll notice the biggest thing is taking out the mop. My goal was to try and make sure that Francisco was, a king and not a worker, or not only a worker. This is the second inspiration. This is a painting from the Isabel Stewart Gardner Museum, Thomas Howard, another Rubens painting. Actually, it's quite a beautiful painting of power. It's an amazing suit of armor. And this is my interpretation. This is Wendy. She's also part of the facilities department at UMass Boston, where I teach. I'm sorry, Maria. And this is a painting from the Harvard Art Museum's, the coronation of Emperor Napoleon I. by David. And this is Wendy. And you can see that she's holding the same scepter and orb that Napoleon was holding, right? Scepter and orb being this symbol of Christ's dominion over earth, and by extension, the monarch's dominion over earth. But Wendy got a roll of paper towels and a stick. She's also a very sweet woman. And this is what it looked like all together. This center panel was just in the show at UMass Boston about local Dorchester artists, and now is on display, well, maybe semi-permanent home at the UMass Boston Labor Resource Center, who helped support this project with a grant. And so finally, I did this series first, even though the original inspiration was from the IBEW workers, because I wanted to go to a meeting. So I actually had to go to two. They had a meeting of their like executive board that was at, it's not really their hall. They don't have a full-time hall. They just sort of shared it with some other union. And it was a small conference room. And then Jimmy made me go to the full meeting where I had to get up in front of everybody and give a talk about why they should all be in paintings. And that meeting was in the Boston Teachers Union Hall, and they have a bar in there, which I didn't know about. It's a cash bar only, but there's a bar in the middle of that Union Hall, which is, I guess, the way to do it. And I was looking at this painting at the time, which is Last Supper by Philippe de Champagne. I'm sorry, I studied Spanish in school, so every time I say anything in French, it comes out sounding terribly. But anyway, I like this painting. That's like a heck of a tablecloth. You could see that it was like folded and ironed and just freshly laid out. That's a really good piece of painting right there in the middle. You can ignore everything else about the painting, but that piece in the middle, that's really something. And so I started working on a triptych of the IBEW, and this was the inspiration for the center panel, which is here. And so this is something like a Last Supper, right? The Last Suppers are always weird because they have all the people sitting on one side of the table and no one sits on opposite. It's a very odd way of having a dinner party. But this is the negotiating table. So all the IBEW guys are on, excuse me, guys and ladies are on one side, and clearly the Verizon people have gotten up and left. This is Miles Calvi, who's the business manager, and he's in a halo from the symbol of the IBEW banner. And these are all real union members. The materials I'm working with, I was trying to pick something industrial, something that would sort of feel gritty. So I was working with this material called the sphaltum. Sphaltum is very odd. It feels kind of like painting with tar. They use it mostly in printmaking labs, but it has very weird properties. You can thin it with mineral spirits, and you can use it like sort of kind of like ink. You can also let it dry, and it dries like plastic. Like it feels, there's no tack to it, and it's very glossy, but it's always open, meaning it's always malleable, and you can take, you know, rags or paintbrushes with solvent and then erase it. So it's a really cool paint because you can work additively or reductively, and it smells like, you know, asphalt. This one, I wanted to zoom in. That's Jimmy. That's the painting of Jimmy. This is the second for the two side panels. I'm obsessed with Franz Hals. This is the painting from the Rijksmuseum, the militia company of District 11 under the command of Captain Rainier Real, the Meager Company. I don't even think Franz Hals finished the painting. Sorry, this other guy, Pietro Cade, you know, took it over after he finished, but it is so beautiful and quite exceptional the way that the background is all gray, and so the black and white of the figure stands off in contrast. Sort of high contrast foreground against low contrast background is pretty pretty damn good way of establishing some pictorial space. And so you can see in the first side panel, this is the one on the right, you know, trying to keep that same circular twisting motion of the figures. And also I armed them. So these guys are actually using the tools that the ironworker lineman would use. I had to I had to ask Jimmy what would be the most violent things that violent looking things that they would use. So the one on the left is a peavey. That's like this thing. And this one is a pole pike. This one I think is for moving logs or large amounts of cables and stuff. It's like a big hook with a poker on the end. But these like weird little shears that they use, this kind of hammer, this odd knife, these are all real lineman tools. And the opposite side, this is the left part of the triptych. And here I wanted to say something about them walking out the door, right? There's a doorway here on the left, and you can see there's almost like a continuous motion from this guy to this woman to this guy here, that he's like they're getting up and leaving almost as these three figures in continuous action. This is in progress in case you wanted to see sort of how working feels like and scale. It's big, right? All the figures are slightly over life size, I think. And these little brackets on the wall are so I can lift the painting up a little higher to work on the bottom. Sort of just raise it up as I go. And that's what the triptych looks like all put together. It's 87 tall by 237 wide. It's just short of 20 feet. And this one last hung in the American Labor Museum. And then after that show, the IBEW local down there in New Jersey, in East Windsor, local 827, wanted to hang it in their hall. So that's where it is now. I kind of like that idea, something cyclical, like going to a meeting, photographing the people, exhibiting the work, and then somehow returning it to them. And it feels like kind of the natural conclusion to this mission. So this is the next piece in that first show at the Commonwealth Museum. This is the Ironworkers Local 7. And I decided to work with them. They have a really good reputation and a strong union, really reliable, just powerful union in Boston. And their headquarters are like 6 minutes from my house. And so I would see their hall all the time. And I was like, okay, this is people I want to work with. But so I spoke to their president, a guy named Rick Abbott, about going, and I explained the project to him, and he was interested. And I showed up, and I was like, okay, the Ironworkers, I'm just going to dress casually. There's no reason to put on airs. And I wore like sneakers and gym shorts. And I showed up, and literally every guy looked exactly like this. They're all wearing bright neon shirts because they're coming straight from work. They're like covered in rust and grease and whatever else you get on yourself from working with iron. And they all have like steel-toed boots. And they took one look at me and they're like, what the hell are you doing here? I just like looked completely wrong. And they looked at me like I was a narc. Like, and they refused to let me inside. And that was like the first time ever that I started to understand like how assaulted the unions feel. Like they're constantly under attack and they have to protect themselves against the outside world. They let me photograph some people outside, but I was not allowed in the meeting. It felt like this guy. Yeah, that's basically what I got. And so again, going back to Franz Hals, I was really inspired by this painting, The Regents of St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Harlem. This is from the Franz Hals Museum. Exquisite painting. And this is my version, Ironworkers Local 7. And so I did everything possible to make the viewer outside the painting, right? Not only are we out, have all their backs to us, but we're also in a different room. That's why this door frame goes all the way around the painting to place us outside the door, where these guys are all the way back inside. And this is the inspiration for the last piece in the show, which is at the exact same time, there was a ballot measure that actually ballot measure number 2 that was trying to expand charter schools in Boston. And the Boston Teachers Union had this enormous campaign, pickets on the corners and stuff, and advertisements everywhere to strike down the ballot measure, which eventually was defeated. And the Boston Teachers Union is led by a president named Jessica Tang. Felt like women leading the charge. It was really quite impressive. And it just kept reminding me of this painting all the time, which is a Delacroix painting from the Louvre, Liberty Leading the People. Incidentally, this is from 1830, from the Revolution of 1830, or the July Revolution, the 3 glorious days. That, for the history buffs, that's the overthrow of the Bourbon King Charles X, and in favor of Louis Philippe, the Duc d'Orléans. And so this is my version, Boston Teachers Union. And the thing that I really wanted to change was where the viewer is. In the original painting, we're down below Liberty. We're down here in this pile of corpses, and the whole mob is coming towards us. But I wanted to feel like I was in the march, when the viewer to feel like they're in the march. So instead, I turned the backs of all the figures to us and made them marching away from us. In actuality, this painting is really like this, because in the Commonwealth Museum, there was this nice little corner. And so I knew I was going to have like 2 works that kind of spoke to each other. So I made the diptych, it's like 2 panels. So this one is on your right, marching alongside you in profile. And this is in front of you, marching away from you. This work is in the current show at the Museum of Work and Culture. And it hangs like this. I like that there's a doorway here because you can march straight down and out the door. And here's the long view. So you can see marching down and out. This is the second show. So this is about 2 years later. I had a show at the American Labor Museum. And it was a sort of a time to rethink some things. One was, I like the work, but I don't think the guys in the unions like the work so much. Like Jimmy's friends felt uncomfortable being portrayed in the painting. I think they liked the idea that an artist was going to be in support of labor unions, but when their picture was actually on the wall, it was like too far from their world, and they weren't into it. The IBEW in New Jersey likes that painting just fine because it's not them. But the guys who were actually in the painting were like, what is going on? But so I didn't want to do it exactly the same way anymore. I wanted to try and figure out a way to show my support for the labor unions, but without that art historical focus of trying to recast historical paintings with contemporary labor union members. But that was also really liberating because my subjects stopped being labor union members and workers working and started to become union men. What I mean by that is that my subjects started to become like the union overall and not necessarily individual by individual. And for me, that was great. Like I felt like I had a huge amount of freedom in the project, and I wasn't so beholden anymore to glorifying them. So this is how an exhibition starts. After you get the email, they send you a floor plan, and so this is what it feels like to plan a show. You get all the measurements and you figure out what's going to go where and what you need to add. And so I was really thinking about that BTU painting, the Boston Teachers Union painting, sort of could fit right here at number 7 and right here at 7 feet and 10 feet. And, I could place the viewer inside this room, but this was such a great space in this one little exhibit room because it was enclosed more than any other room. And I felt like as much as those 2 panels from the diptych were starting to make like in front of you and to the right of you, I could also make to the left of you and back of you. Like I could sort of complete the square of wrapping up the viewer. And so I started to work on this series. So this is exactly opposite the painting of the BTU marching away from you, right? So this is the back wall. And I wanted them to feel like as stony and as wall-like as possible, like they're made out of concrete. So the whole thing is chock full of marble dust. It's a really like gnarly kind of surface. It feels like you could like knock your knuckles against it, like. But that's also why they're so limited value range, right? It's to make it into a wall. This is a painting by Giacometti from the MFA here in Boston that I really like. And so, clearly I'm like learning some things from him in terms of limiting value range. But I feel like whereas Giacometti's like using it as a way of talking about emotion, right? I want it to feel not just emotional, but also like symbolic, limited value range to feel like concrete. And so this is the left wall. This goes, yeah, to the left of the viewer. And these are all members of the Hudson County Central Labor Council. And you can see that the whole thing is like meant to propel you forward. Like the same way that the BTU paintings are all about like marching off into the distance. Try to do that here, right? Where things like the lines in the background are all horizontal and move you, sort of like makes your eyes slide from across the painting. And also you see that the way that the shadows are all moving forward too, like one shadow, one shadow, one shadow. They're all in front of the viewers. I'm sorry, in front of the subjects. So that even the light is coming from their back, pushing them forward. This is the right wall. So this goes behind the right panel from the BTU. And as soon as I made this painting, I couldn't help but seeing the shadows, Alfred Hitchcock. I still can't see that painting without seeing Alfred Hitchcock. And this is what it looks like put together, right? Where all the people in the room, even though it's 8 panels here plus the 2 big panels of the BTU, everybody in the whole room is facing the same direction. And this is the installation view from the American Labor Museum. So the next piece I was working on was for the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers, the IFPTE. Sometimes they just call themselves Turnpike Local 194. And I was really inspired by this painting, which I think is my either #1 or #2 most favorite painting in Boston. There's a Turner painting at the MFA that might be the other one. But this one's called Demonstration. It's from the Harvard Art Museums. I love Ben Shahn. I had to write a college application essay, and you had to say who would be your roommate from history, like if you could share a dorm room with anybody. And at 17, I picked Ben Shahn, which is a very nerdy answer for a 17-year-old to give, but I stand by it. Anyway, this painting is terrific. And I was trying to draw on this, right, which is like the color of the safety vests. This is maybe the more optimistic view, like what does a Turnpike Local 194 guy member wear? Or more pessimistically, them being treated like traffic cones. And so I asked their president, a guy named Barry Kushner, if there was a slogan or some sort of messaging that they used in some of their labor actions. And he came back with one that they used. It was about a protest about winter working conditions, and it was 9 hours work in 9 hours work in a 10-hour day. No, 9 hours work in an 8-hour day. That's it. So I started working on the 9 hours. See, not 9 hours work in an 8-hour day. And these paintings are done individual panels on canvas. So the first thing I did was paint them with acrylic fluorescent orange. So the background and really doesn't come through in the display gamut of a laptop, but that's really bright orange. And then I made this stencil, and the whole top coat, all the white is spray painted on. I like the idea of using spray paint. It's like the people's medium, the language of the left. And this is what it looks like all together. And this is also at the Museum of Work and Culture. 9 hours work in an 8-hour day. And this is just over 10 feet long. So these are 24 by 18 canvases. So it's about 10 and a half feet. This is what it looks like there. So this is from the current show. This is the view. Color's a little better in this one. I like the color here on the left. If I can get that all the way across, I'd be happy. So then I started working on the last couple pieces for the American Labor Museum show. And part of the issue was they had 3 display cases that were, I could move around, I could choose where they went, but I could not get rid of them. So no matter what, I had to fill the display cases with something. And mostly I'm a painter or make paintings and drawings, but I was kind of excited, like, all right, what does this actually look like if I have to make a sculpture? And I don't know, it's kind of fun. So I made this, right? So these are the Amiibo Workers from New York, New Jersey. And they're interesting. Right? These guys are not like longshoremen. They work on like ocean liner ships, you know, cargo vessels, and they all work in like the engine room. And they sent me all the pictures of them working, but they also sent me the pictures of them like hanging out. And I guess these guys, you know, are all sailors, and they all come home to New York, and all they do is just sit in the bar. And so just kind of kibitzing. And so I wanted to make these sculptures feel like the guys just kind of hanging around, but also make them look kind of like they got dragged out of the ocean. Sort of like with this palette. That's why they look like that. This is by my friend Pat Murray. So I wanted to make the folding chairs. So I was like, okay, we can laser cut plexiglass to make the folding chairs. And my friend Pat helped me make this vector file for his laser cutter. And actually, he let me come. He's a STEM teacher at CM, and he let me come there for like 4 days or so, and like laser cut all day, every day, while the students were taking their finals. And he was like the most patient and let me just work on it for a long time. The thing that like I'm most proud of is that I wanted the sides of the backs of the chairs to be straight, but I wanted to be able to put a curve into the back of the chair with a heat gun. And so I made it trapezoidal so that the legs would become parallel when the back was curved out, which worked. I'm really proud of that. And this is the material that I used to make the figures. It's called Sculpta Mold, which is this awesome mixture of plaster and paper pulp. And all you have to do is add water, and it turns into this stuff. It feels like wet tuna fish. It's the best. And this is what the piece looks like at the Museum of Work and Culture. They have very nice display cases. And these are the guys hanging around. And this is the Union Hall for the North Atlantic States Regional Council of Carpenters. This is even closer than the Ironworkers Hall to my house. I live like where all the union halls are. This is probably 4 minutes on a bike to get there. And the Carpenters Union are interesting, in comparison to like the IBEW that we were talking about before, because they don't work for a single employer. They work for like every contractor in the city. And I think like the logistics are different. They go and do protest actions outside of construction projects that aren't using union labor, like this one at the Sheridan. So each individual picket or strike is not as massive as if you have a single employer. But this one at the Sheridan was pretty big, and they got some good press out of it. And the Carpenters Union let me come into their hall and collect all the sawdust in the basement because they have training shops for new inductees. So this is the piece that I made of the carpenters. It's like, what does a carpenter look like covered in sawdust? So it's pretty literal, but maybe something symbolic too. And this is another view. And this is the original installation at the American Labor Museum. And this is the view from the Museum of Work and Culture. And, you know, they're all facing away from us. And that's so that we don't feel like we're talking to them, right? We are not lecturing to the union. We are just sitting in the row behind them. This is the kind of moment that gets me kind of excited, is when it feels like they're talking to each other, right? This guy puts his elbow back in the chair and this other guy leans back to hear what he has to say. For me, that's when it comes alive, those little moments like that. And the current show, right? This is the invitation to the show at the Museum of Work and Culture. This is the museum. So if anybody, you know, people who aren't from the area, this is what the museum looks like. They're open. You can go there if you want. I think you have to make an appointment to go, but it's really amazing place. And so when I was working on the show, this was going on full time. The Stop and Shop strike, the UFCW Local 1445. This was April of 2019. It was an 11-day strike, and it was the typical contract bargaining. They were fighting for a wage increase. They wanted to maintain their healthcare coverage. A big thing was these members get 50% overtime if they work on Sundays, so they were able to maintain that and maintain their retirement healthcare. And so after 11 days, they won. Oh, Biden spoke there too. This is at South Bay, if anybody knows where that is. That's the Stop and Shop over in South Bay, which is, yeah. Anyway, it's not the best shopping mall, but it's okay. It's really close to my house. And that's where Biden came to speak, which is cool. And this is what the paintings look like. So I did 3 different Stop and Shops. This is one on Marcy Boulevard in Dorchester. This is the one from South Bay, also in Dorchester. And this is the one from Mattapan. So these are 3, you know, put together as a triptych. You know, actually, I never got to see them all together until I hung them at the show, right? My studio is not big enough. I don't have a 18-foot wall. These are 4 feet tall and 6 feet wide each. So it's 18 foot altogether. But I really wanted to make it, even though it's, you know, kind of episodic, that there's one painting with a hard line, then one painting with a hard line, and then third painting, that the picket line would be continuous. So to do that, I measured out like 4 inches of the road, 3/4 of an inch for the lip of the sidewalk, 4 inches setback for the building, so that the figures would kind of be standing on the same line as they moved across. This is what it looks like. The painting is really minimal. There's only 1, 2, 3, 4 colors. Right? All the red is one red, just diluted. There's nothing mixed into it. I just changed the opacity of it. There's a little bit of white on the signs and the blue. So if I want to do something like make the building stand out from the sky, I actually cheated. I painted all the buildings with a slight silver first, like a very faint silver, so that this is the current view, so that the sky would feel more luminous and the buildings would feel slightly matted. And these are the workers. And so a strike like seems like it's something really like victorious, right? They won the strike, they got their wage increase. But what I've come to understand is that a strike is like terrible. During the strike, they get $100 per week from their union. If they're a part-time worker, they get $50 a week. Like if you have a family, what are you gonna do with $50 a week? And it's like, it's horrible. And when they begin, they don't know how long it's gonna last. So it's this like agonizing moment. So I wanted to make a red that felt like America, right? This red, white, and blue, this patriotic painting, but it's like this agonized red to kind of reflect the dread and terror and despair that these people were going through at that moment. But they won. I want to show you this piece in the middle here. You notice that the painting is red, white, and blue, but none of the flags are. I wanted to make, it's like the painting, the overall act of picketing is an act of patriotism, even more so than just the symbol of the flag. And I think that the American flag is less red, white, and blue because the rest of the painting is. Like I showed that there was an option to paint it red, white, and blue, and I intentionally didn't. I think that's what it means when the painting has the full colors, but the flag doesn't. And the last piece. So this was going on this summer when I had to finish the last piece for the show. So this is from August at Brooklyn Friends School. So in May of 2019, 80% of the faculty and staff of the BFS decided to form a union. It's a school-wide union, so it's the teachers, the janitorial staff, the lunchroom workers, the librarians, everybody in one big union. And on August 14th of this year, a woman named Chrissy Caceres, who's the head of the BFS, sent a letter to the National Labor Relations Board attempting to decertify the union. And this was in response to a Trump era change in the way that the NLRB would certify unions. They were trying to reverse like a Obama era decision that unions in religious institutions were under the jurisdiction of the NLRB. And the school tried to decertify the union. And when I started making this piece, this was totally open-ended. You know, it just started. They were threatening to strike. Nobody knew what would happen. And so I wanted to make this image of these chairs, right? These like a union meeting chairs, but abandoned, busted. And not just abandoned like they just got up, but like abandoned like they've been underwater for like 6 months. So they're all, wanted to make them look all rusted up. And this is why I'm a painter and not a sculptor, because a sculptor would have like gotten some pig iron and actually made these things out of metal, but I'm a painter, so I made them out of plexiglass and painted them to look like they're rusty. The hardest part, man, I tried it so many times. I couldn't get it to look matte enough that I kept mixing like this pigment with matte medium. And even with matte medium, it had too much gloss. So what I inevitably ended up doing was I took unbound pigment, so pigment with no acrylic binder, it's just dispersed in water. And I painted that directly on, and then took some spray fixative, some matte fixative, and sprayed them afterwards to seal the paint in place, or the pigment in place. But anyway, that worked. That took me a long time to figure out. This is what it looks like at the Museum of Work and Culture. This is the current installation. The video doesn't do it justice, doesn't look rusty enough. I showed my dad a picture. I said, Dad, does this look rusty? He said, yeah, they look rusty, but also like they're in revolt. And I was like, okay, I can run with that. This is the last piece I did, just finished it. And on the day of the opening of the show, I'm sure because I made that sculpture, the school won. The admin withdrew their petition from the NLRB, and the teachers and workers at the school got to keep their union. So that just happened. That was great. So this is the show. This is the current installation at the Museum of Work and Culture. You can see the pieces, right? There's the UFCW. Here's the Brooklyn Friends School. Here's MEBA. Here's the BTU. A couple of other views. And so what I really like about the museum is that they show the history of work in the Woonsocket area, and they have a real focus on the history of immigrants from Quebec working in the textile mills. Sarah told me that they used to have kids working in the mills, but the work was so dangerous that the parents couldn't stomach watching their kids work because they thought they would be, maimed or killed. So their solution to that was to separate the parents from their kids. Like the kids could still work, they just couldn't work next to their parents. Pretty horrifying. And I like having the show there because it feels like this contemporary work is the latest episode in that history of labor. That it doesn't feel like the end, it's just the latest. And I think it also makes us remember how fragile our labor gains are, that if we take child labor laws and 40-hour work week and healthcare and retirement for granted, then we do so at our own risk. And if we want to have a middle class in the country, then we need to make sure our labor laws are strong and unions have public support. And this is my real goal for the work, to work with the unions to show my support and to, if I can, bring the artwork to the union halls and preach the message. And this is the latest thing I'm obsessed with, just so you know that this is an ongoing situation. If I had another 2 months, I would make another piece about these guys. That's Timothy Sullivan and Kenneth Percet. They worked for Mayor Walsh in Boston, and they put pressure on Boston Calling, which is a music festival, to hire union workers. And they were not so subtle about saying, you guys need permits, you should hire some union workers. And they were indicted in federal court and convicted of extortion, even though they didn't personally benefit. But convictions were just overturned. So free Kenneth Percet, free Timothy Sullivan actually worked. And the last thing I want to say is thank you. Big thanks to the Museum of Work and Culture. Thank you, Sarah and Gary, for helping me hang the show. Pat, if you're out there, thanks for doing all that laser cutting, man. Couldn't have done without you. I wanted to thank the unions, like the IBEW, Local 2222, the BTU, the Ironworkers, Local 7, the SEIU, the IFPTE, the Hudson County Central Labor Council, the Carpenters Union, MEBA, UFCW Local 1445, and congrats to the BFS Union. And thanks to Karen for putting up with me.
Thank you very much, Zach. This was really interesting and just really interesting to hear about your inspirations. I thought that it was a great presentation. And as you said, pictures don't do justice to the art. So again, for those of you who can come to the museum, please come and see Zach's show. We can hang on here for like a few more minutes. If you have a chance and just can write in the chat where you are from, it would be interesting to see what state or city and state where our audience is from this evening. And with us, I don't know if we have, do we have a gallery view? I wanted to introduce Dr. Morgan Graff. She's the executive director of the Rhode Island Historical Society. So she's with us this evening. I think Morgan's still here. Yeah, she is. I can see her now. So thank you for being with us, Morgan. So Zach, do you want to entertain a few questions? Is that something you'd like to do?
Sure.
Yeah.
No problem.
Okay, is everybody unmuted, Sarah, or?
Yep, everyone is free to unmute themselves. And if you prefer to write it in the chat, I'm happy to read the question to Zach. We have lots of thank yous in the chats and comments about your tremendous work. So.
Oh, we got some visitors from Chicago. Excellent. Thank you for
So
joining us.
I wrote my world's longest
You-
chat. So it's Morgan here. Thank you so much, Zach. Thank you for we're so excited to have the show up, and I can't wait to see it on Friday. And my world's longest chat was just when you were doing your piece for Labor Day, and I got to watch that. And this reminded me that not only am I also a Penn grad, but I grew up on Panther Road across from Cheltenham High. My dad was a public school art teacher in Camden, New Jersey for 46 years and the head of the strike committee. And so spent my childhood in and out of jail. Just thought it was a lot of fun coincidences, and so delighted to have the chance to work with you and represent your work at the museum. So thank you very much for this talk, and thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you. That's amazing. I didn't know you grew up in Cheltenham.
Yeah, I spent my little childhood walking to Wingcote Elementary School. So.
Zach, thanks so much for your talk. Alistair Saunders here from Elkins Park, Pennsylvania. Really interesting to hear your comment about how the union workers didn't like to see their depictions within paintings. Do you think that's just generalizable? They don't like seeing themselves, or was it something about painting? Or would photographs have worked, or a sculpture?
I think they would have been okay with photography. Right. I think maybe there's something about the subjectivity of painting that probably would have applied to sculpture too, that maybe they just didn't like being interpreted. That if I had shown them a photograph and it was just them straight up, maybe they would have been okay with that.
Interesting.
Any other questions or comments?
Hi, Zach, and everyone else in the room. I too am completely obsessed with Franz Hals, so I loved seeing that, and all those pictures, the Velazquez, I just showed all of those in the classes that I teach, which is costume history. So I loved seeing them used in a different way very much. It was great. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm in Ogden, Utah.
Great.
I have a question. Can you hear me, Zach? The workers, do they know of your basis of your taking the work from inspirations that you found in historic paintings? Did you share that with them? Was that part of the story? And by the way, I also love Franz Hals, and your mother gave me a book with Franz Hals in it when I was a child, so you know there's a connection there.
Some of them from East Windsor came to the talk in New Jersey, and so they would have heard a little bit of that explanation, but otherwise not too much. You know, and also I think that my inspiration, it's like a little bit once removed, that I didn't take any of the paintings exactly, none of the poses exactly match. So, you know, I'm definitely inspired by those historical paintings, but the reference, I don't know if it would be obvious if I didn't tell you. So,
Right.
I don't know.
Right. Well, it's wonderful.
Thanks.
Okay, so if we don't have any other questions, I guess we're going to say good night. And oh, do we have another question? No? Okay. So thank you again for joining us. And thank you, Zach. Congratulations. And well, I hope to see many of you at the Museum of Work and Culture.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Good evening.